The hum of the airplane filled the cabin, steady and low, like a heartbeat against the night. I pressed my forehead against the cold window, staring out at the sea of stars scattered across the endless dark sky. Flying had always made me nervous, but tonight it was worse. My palms were damp, and my chest felt heavy, as though the past had followed me onto this plane. It had been 3 years since the accident. 3 years since I buried the man I loved. My husband, Daniel, was gone. Or at least that's what I told myself every morning when I forced myself out of bed. There had been no body, just official words on official paper. Crash, they said. No survivors. For years I told myself it didn't matter, that he was gone and I had to move forward. But deep inside, the unanswered questions haunted me. Beside me, my 7-year-old son, Noah, was practically bouncing in his seat. Flying was an adventure to him. Clouds were castles, the aisle was a racetrack, and every stranger was a potential new friend. I envied that innocence, the way he could find joy anywhere, while I carried grief like an anchor. "Mom," he whispered, tugging my sleeve as the seatbelt sign dinged off. "Can I have the window now?" I smiled faintly, lifting him into my lap so he could peer outside. He pressed his small hand against the glass, eyes wide. "It looks like magic," he said, his voice full of awe. I kissed his head. "It is magic, sweetheart. Flying always is." The flight attendants moved through the aisles, passing out drinks and snacks. I tried to relax, sipping water, telling myself it was just another trip, just another long night in the air. But then Noah froze. His tiny body stiffened against me, and his gaze locked somewhere across the aisle. "Mom," he whispered again, but this time his voice was sharp. "Mom, look." I followed his finger. A man sat 3 rows ahead, across the aisle. From behind, I saw broad shoulders, dark brown hair that curled slightly at the nape, and a familiar tilt of the head. Something inside me jolted, a cold shock racing down my spine. "That's Dad," Noah whispered, his little voice trembling. The world seemed to stop. My water glass nearly slipped from my hand. My breath caught so sharply in my chest it hurt. I wanted to dismiss it, to tell him it was just his imagination, that grief played cruel tricks on little minds. But my own eyes betrayed me. The man's posture, the way he adjusted his collar, the way he tapped his fingers against the armrest. It was all Daniel. But Daniel had been gone for 3 years. I gripped the armrest, heart pounding so loudly I swore the whole cabin could hear it. My rational mind screamed, "It can't be him." But my heart whispered something far more dangerous. "What if it is?" The man shifted slightly, leaning toward the aisle, and for the first time I saw a partial profile. My breath hitched. It wasn't just similar. It was him. I turned quickly back to Noah, clutching him tightly. He looked up at me with wide, innocent eyes. "Mom, why didn't you tell me Dad was alive?" My lips parted, but no words came. Because I didn't know the answer myself. For a long moment I couldn't move. The noise of the cabin, the clinking of glasses, the low chatter of passengers, the hiss of the air vents, faded into a dull hum. My son's words hung in the air, echoing louder than any announcement over the intercom. "That's Dad." I shook my head slightly, trying to ground myself. Well, it wasn't possible. It couldn't be. Daniel was gone. I had seen the folded flag, signed the papers, watched his name etched into cold stone at the cemetery. I had spent nights on the kitchen floor, sobbing until my throat was raw, mourning the man who was my everything. My husband hadn't just walked out of our lives. He had been taken from us. But my son wasn't lying. He wasn't cruel. He wasn't confused. Children have a way of seeing things that adults train themselves to ignore. And in Noah's wide, unblinking eyes, I saw certainty. I forced myself to glance back at the man, telling myself I'd find the differences if I just looked hard enough. Maybe he was taller. Maybe his nose was narrower. Maybe his jaw was sharper. Please let him be someone else. But every detail betrayed me. The man rubbed his temple with the same impatient motion Daniel used when he was tired. He flipped through a book, something dense, probably non-fiction, just like Daniel used to on our flights. His movements weren't just familiar. They were painfully, intimately his. My chest grew tight. A part of me screamed to run down the aisle, grab his shoulder, and demand an explanation. But another part of me was frozen, terrified that if I got too close, the illusion would shatter, that it wasn't Daniel at all, just a cruel lookalike who would leave me even more broken than before. "Mom!" Noah's small voice pulled me back. "Why are you crying?" I touched my cheek, startled to feel tears running freely. I wiped them quickly, forcing a shaky smile. "I'm fine, sweetheart. Just tired." But Noah wasn't convinced. His little brow furrowed, his voice barely above a whisper. "It's him. I know it is." He looked at me. The words hit like a bullet. My pulse hammered in my ears. Slowly I dared to glance again, and my breath caught. The man had shifted in his seat. He was no longer reading. He was staring out the window, jaw tense, as though lost in thought. For a split second, his profile was fully illuminated by the cabin lights. It was Daniel. I knew that face better than my own. The slope of his nose, the faint scar near his eyebrow from when we moved into our first apartment and he cut himself trying to hang shelves. The tiny crease near his mouth that only appeared when he was deep in thought. These weren't coincidences. They were truths etched into him, truths I had memorized over a decade of love and marriage. My chest tightened, and the cabin suddenly felt too small, too suffocating. My rational mind spun in chaos. If he's alive, why didn't he come back? Why let us suffer for 3 years? Why lie? I grabbed my armrest so hard my knuckles turned white. My throat was dry, but I forced myself to whisper, almost to myself, "It can't be." But then, as if he had heard me, the man turned. His eyes, those deep storm-gray eyes I had once fallen into 1,000 times, met mine across the aisle. And in that instant the world collapsed. He froze. His lips parted, barely noticeable. His hand twitched, as though he wanted to reach out. For a fraction of a second, I saw recognition flash in his gaze. Then, just as quickly, he looked away, pretending I wasn't even there. Noah tugged on my sleeve. "See, Mom. He knows us." And that was the moment I realized 2 things at once. My husband was alive. And for some reason he didn't want us to know. I couldn't take my eyes off him. The cabin seemed smaller now, as if the walls of the airplane were pressing in on me, trapping me with a ghost who wasn't supposed to exist. My heart pounded so violently I thought it might burst. For 3 years, I had carried his absence like a scar. I had imagined this moment countless times. Daniel walking through the door, Daniel calling my name, Daniel explaining that it had all been a mistake. But now that he was right there, just 3 rows away, the reality was nothing like the fantasy. There was no joyous reunion, no relieved embrace. There was only silence, distance, and the sickening realization that if he truly had survived, then he had chosen to stay gone. Noah, still leaning against me, whispered again, "Mom, why won't he come here?" The innocent question cut me to my core. I had no answer, only a swirl of dread and hope that battled in my chest. I wanted to scream, to demand the truth. But my body was locked in place, every nerve buzzing with fear. I needed to be sure. What if my grief was tricking me? What if I was clinging to shadows in a stranger's face? The flight attendant passed by, asking if I needed anything. My voice barely worked as I muttered, "Water." When she walked past his row, I held my breath, watching him closely. He thanked her in a low tone, and my blood ran cold. That voice. It was Daniel's voice, deep and steady, the one that used to whisper promises into my ear at night. Felt dizzy. I had to do something. I couldn't just sit there drowning in questions. I rummaged through my purse with trembling fingers until I found a pen and an old receipt. My hands shook as I wrote a few words. "Daniel, if it's you, please look back." I folded the note, my pulse racing as I considered slipping it to him. But doubt gnawed at me. What if I was wrong? What if he looked at me with confusion, And I embarrassed myself in front of the whole cabin. Worse. What if it was him and he still turned away? I froze with the paper clutched in my hand. Then Noah did something unexpected. Before I could stop him, he slid out of his seat, clutching his little stuffed airplane toy, and began walking down the aisle toward the man. "Noah!" I hissed, reaching out, but he was quick, determined. I watched in horror as he stopped right beside the man, staring up at him with wide eyes. The man glanced down briefly. His expression flickered. His knuckles tightened on the armrest. But instead of acknowledging Noah, he turned his face back toward the window, jaw clenched. Noah stood there for a moment longer, confused, then trudged back to me, his lips trembling. He climbed into his seat, pressing his face into my arm. Why didn't Dad talk to me? Tears burned my eyes. I hugged him tightly, though my own body shook. Across the aisle I saw Daniel, because it was Daniel, run a hand down his face as if struggling to hold himself together. For the briefest second, I thought I saw guilt in his posture, his shoulders sagging under invisible weight. I knew then. This wasn't a mistake. He wasn't dead. He was alive and hiding from us. But why? The question churned inside me like poison. And with every passing second, my need for answers grew stronger. I wasn't going to let him slip away again. Not this time. I couldn't sit still anymore. The weight of silence between us pressed on my chest like a boulder, each second another blow to my sanity. I had buried him once. I refused to bury the truth again. The plane was dimmed now, most passengers settling in for the long flight. Overhead lights glowed in patches. Somewhere behind me I could hear a baby fussing. But my world had shrunk to one thing: Daniel. I waited until the seatbelt sign flicked off with a muted chime. My hands trembled as I unbuckled, whispering to Noah, "Stay here, sweetheart. I'll be right back." He looked up at me with frightened eyes. "Are you going to talk to Dad?" My throat tightened. "Yes," I whispered, though even saying the word Dad felt like a betrayal to the pain I'd lived with for 3 long years. I stepped into the aisle, legs weak, heart hammering as I moved toward him. He didn't look up. He pretended to be absorbed in his book, though I could see the stiffness in his jaw, the unnatural stillness in his posture. He knew I was coming. I stopped beside his row, my voice trembling but low, so only he could hear. "Daniel." The name cracked out of me like a secret I'd been holding too long. He froze. His eyes flickered to me for the briefest second, then back to his book. His lips pressed into a hard line. "Daniel," I said again, louder this time, my anger pushing through the grief. "It's you. I know it's you. Don't you dare ignore me." His fingers clenched around the pages, leaving a faint crumple in the paper. But still he said nothing. 3 years, I whispered, my voice breaking. 3 years I thought you were dead. I buried you in my heart, Daniel. Our son cried himself to sleep, asking why his father wasn't coming home. And now you sit here, alive, and act like you don't know us. That did it. His hands shook, the mask slipping for just a moment. Slowly, he closed the book and turned his face toward me. When our eyes locked, my knees nearly gave out. It was him. Undeniably, impossibly him. The same storm gray eyes. The same familiar lines of his face. But there was something else now. Something heavy and haunted in his gaze. "Sit down," he muttered, his voice low, urgent. "Please. Not here." The sound of his voice nearly broke me. "Not here," I hissed, tears burning. "You left me to raise our son alone. You let us believe you were dead. You don't get to tell me when and where, Daniel." Passengers were starting to glance over, sensing the tension. He glanced around nervously, then stood abruptly, brushing past me toward the back of the plane. Without thinking, I followed. Near the bathrooms, the hum of the engines drowned most conversations. He turned sharply, cornering himself by the narrow wall. His face was pale, his hands gripping the counter as though holding himself together. "Why?" The word ripped out of me. Why would you let us believe you were gone? Do you have any idea what that did to us?" His jaw tightened, eyes darting as though searching for escape. For a long moment he said nothing. Then finally, in a voice barely above a whisper, he spoke. "I had no choice." The words hit me like a blade. No choice. What could possibly justify abandoning your wife and child, letting them mourn you like a corpse? My voice shook with rage and heartbreak. No choice. You were my husband, his father. If you're alive, Daniel, then you chose to leave us. For the first time, his eyes softened, pain flickering there. He looked at me as though he wanted to explain everything, to unburden a truth he'd carried too long. But then, just as quickly, he shook his head. "Please don't ask me to explain here. It's not safe." Not safe. The words coiled in my stomach, cold and sharp. What could possibly be unsafe about a family reunion? On a crowded plane. Before I could press further, the intercom crackled with the captain's voice, announcing turbulence ahead. The seatbelt sign blinked on. Daniel stepped past me. His movements quick and deliberate, retreating to his seat. I stood frozen, trembling, my mind spinning with his cryptic words. Not safe. What had Daniel gotten himself into? The plane shuddered violently, overhead compartments rattling as the captain's calm voice urged everyone to buckle up. I stumbled back to my seat, my hands still shaking, my mind reeling with the words that wouldn't stop echoing in my head. It's not safe. Not safe for who? For him. For me. For Noah. I sank down next to my son, fumbling to fasten my belt. He looked at me expectantly, eyes wide with the innocence of a child who believed the impossible had just come true. "Did you talk to Dad?" he whispered. My throat ached. "Yes," I said, forcing my voice steady. I think it's him." His little hand gripped mine, warm and trusting. And that trust nearly shattered me, because I still didn't understand why. Why had Daniel abandoned us? What could be so terrible that he would fake his death? The lights flickered as the turbulence worsened, plunging the cabin into brief shadows. People murmured nervously. Somewhere up front a baby wailed. The air felt heavier, tighter, as though the plane itself was holding its breath. I glanced toward Daniel's row. He sat rigid, staring forward, knuckles white on the armrest. But what caught my eye wasn't him. It was the man sitting 2 seats behind him. A man in a dark jacket, sunglasses still perched absurdly on his face despite the dim cabin lighting. He wasn't panicking like the others. He wasn't even looking at the window or the seatbelt sign. His gaze was locked, unblinking, on Daniel. A chill slid down my spine. It wasn't casual observation. It was surveillance. The turbulence jolted again, masking the sound of my gasp. I forced myself to look away, but my pulse thundered. Whoever that man was, he was watching my husband. Watching him the way predators watch prey. And suddenly, Daniel's warning made sense. It's not safe. The plane steadied after a few agonizing minutes, and the lights returned to normal. Slowly, conversations picked back up, people laughing nervously about the scare. But I couldn't relax. I couldn't stop stealing glances at the man in the jacket, and at Daniel, who seemed painfully aware of the eyes burning into his back. I shifted in my seat, careful not to draw attention, and that's when I noticed something. Sticking out from the seat pocket in front of Daniel was a corner of a worn, leather-bound notebook. It wasn't his style. Daniel had never carried notebooks before. But something about the way it was half hidden, almost shoved into the pocket as if he hadn't meant to reveal it, drew me like a magnet. When the flight attendants began serving drinks, moving slowly down the aisle, Daniel leaned forward to speak quietly to the passenger beside him. It was my chance. I stood, feigning a trip to the restroom, and as I passed his row, my hand darted out. In one swift motion, I tugged the notebook free and tucked it against my side. My heart pounded like I had just stolen state secrets. Maybe I had. Back in the cramped restroom, I locked the door and flipped it open. The pages were filled with scrawled notes, diagrams, and names. Dozens of names. Some were crossed out. Others had strange symbols beside them. And on one page near the top, written in bold letters, was my own name. I nearly dropped the notebook into the sink. My stomach lurched. Why would my name be in here? And worse, what did the symbols next to it mean? Noah's name wasn't there, but Daniel's was. His had been circled, underlined, and beside it was a date. A date from 3 years ago. The same week he had supposedly died. My breath caught in my throat. Was this notebook proof of why Daniel vanished? Or proof that he was part of something darker than I could ever imagine? A sharp knock jolted me out of my spiral. "Occupied," I called quickly, shoving the notebook under my sweater. When I opened the door, the man in the dark jacket was standing in the aisle, waiting. Too close. Too still. His head turned slightly as I passed, and though he said nothing, I felt the weight of his gaze like a blade pressed to my spine. Back at my seat, I slid the notebook into my bag, hiding it from Noah. Daniel's eyes flicked to me as I sat, and for the first time, his expression cracked into panic. He knew. He knew I had taken it. And the look in his eyes was not anger. It was fear. The steady hum of the engines filled the cabin, but inside my chest, it felt like a war drum. My fingers itched toward my bag, where the leather notebook now rested like a burning coal. Daniel's eyes kept flicking back toward me, silently pleading, but I refused to look at him. Not yet. I needed to know what he had written, what truth he'd been hiding for 3 years. Noah dozed against my arm, lulled to sleep by exhaustion and turbulence. Carefully I shifted, pulling the bag closer. My pulse raced as I eased the notebook out, shielding it behind the in-flight magazine. I flipped to the page with my name. The symbol beside it, 2 interlocking circles with a slash through them, meant nothing to me. But on the opposite page, beneath a column of names I didn't recognize, a note was scrawled in jagged handwriting. "Eliminated. Keep Emma safe. She must never know." The words blurred as my vision swam. Keep me safe. From what? And why write "she must never know" if all of this was meant to protect me? I turned the pages frantically. Coordinates. Sketches of people's faces. A list labeled "contacts," with numbers I didn't recognize. And then, another entry that made my blood run cold. The flight. If they follow, everything ends. The flight. This flight. I snapped the notebook shut, my heart hammering so loud I thought the man in the jacket might hear it from his seat. I glanced up, and sure enough, he was still watching. His lips moved slightly, whispering into a device I couldn't see. He wasn't just a suspicious passenger. He was tracking Daniel, and by extension, me and Noah. The captain's voice came overhead, announcing we'd begin our descent in 30 minutes. Relief should have washed over me, but instead, dread knotted in my stomach. If Daniel had written about this flight, then the danger wasn't waiting at the destination. It was already here. I leaned down to whisper to Noah, but he stirred half asleep. "Mom," he mumbled. "Are we going home?" I forced a smile I didn't feel. "Yes, sweetheart. Soon." Across the aisle, Daniel shifted in his seat, his expression torn. Finally he mouthed something at me. "Give it back." I shook my head. Not until I had answers. But answers came sooner than I expected. The man in the jacket stood suddenly, walking toward the lavatory. As he passed Daniel, their eyes met in a silent exchange that froze me. Not strangers. Not even enemies necessarily. There was recognition there, old and dangerous. As soon as the man disappeared down the narrow aisle, Daniel leaned across his row, whispering harshly. "Emma, listen to me. That book. You don't understand what you're holding. It's not just notes. It's a ledger. Every name in there is someone who was part of it or a target. Including me. Including you." My throat went dry. Part of what? He swallowed, jaw tight. "A group. Black operations. Off the record. We did things no one was supposed to know about. When I tried to get out, they staged my death. If they find out you have that book." His voice broke off as footsteps echoed. The man in the jacket had returned, sliding back into his seat like nothing had happened. But Daniel's eyes never left mine. "If they find out you have it, Emma, you and Noah won't live to see tomorrow." I clutched the notebook to my chest, trembling. The plane rocked slightly as we descended through thick clouds, city lights beginning to glimmer below. Safety felt so close, yet impossibly far. Daniel leaned back, exhaling sharply. "When we land, follow my lead. Don't trust anyone. Not even the authorities. Especially not them." I wanted to scream, to demand more, but his gaze silenced me. This wasn't a reunion. It wasn't even forgiveness. It was survival. And then, as the wheels prepared to touch down, the man in the jacket reached into his coat. My heart stuttered. For a fraction of a second, I saw the glint of metal. A weapon. And we were trapped at 30,000 feet with nowhere to run. The seatbelt sign dinged overhead as the plane began its final descent. Passengers shuffled, some yawning, others stretching as though nothing extraordinary was happening. But for me, every second stretched like a lifetime. My grip on Noah tightened, the leather notebook pressed between us like both a weapon and a curse. The man in the jacket shifted in his seat. I'd seen the flash of metal, gun, knife, I didn't know. Daniel's gaze darted toward him, then back to me. He leaned forward, his voice low and urgent. "Emma, when we land, don't go through the main exit. There'll be people waiting. Follow me. No questions." I wanted to scream at him. 3 years gone. 3 years of lies. And now you expect me to trust you. But my son's small hand gripped mine, warm and trembling. His innocent trust was the anchor pulling me toward Daniel, despite every betrayal. The wheels screeched against the tarmac. Passengers clapped half-heartedly, relieved. My pulse, however, only spiked higher. The man in the jacket rose the second we stopped taxiing, pushing impatiently toward the aisle. Daniel's hand shot out, pressing me down. "Wait." The crowd funneled forward, chatter filling the air. Noah yawned, rubbing his eyes, oblivious to the storm around us. Then, in a blur, Daniel stood, blocking the man's path. Their eyes locked. "You're late," the man muttered, low enough for only us to hear. Daniel's reply was colder than I'd ever heard. "And you shouldn't be here at all." My blood froze. They weren't strangers. They were connected, tied by some invisible thread of the past I didn't yet understand. The man's hand slipped inside his coat. I clutched Noah to my chest, bracing for the worst. But Daniel moved faster. His fist snapped out, catching the man in the ribs. The impact knocked him back into his seat, gasping for air. Passengers shrieked, some pulling out phones, others scrambling down the aisle in panic. "Emma, move!" Daniel barked. I stumbled into the aisle, clutching Noah, the notebook wedged under my arm. My legs shook as I followed Daniel through the chaos. Flight attendants yelled for order, their voices drowned by the frenzy. The man in the jacket struggled up, rage twisting his features, but Daniel grabbed him by the collar and hissed something I couldn't hear before shoving him back down. We rushed toward a rear exit where a stunned attendant hesitated. Daniel flashed something, an old ID maybe, and barked, "Emergency protocol." She paled, unlocking the door. The rush of cool night air hit my face, mingling with jet fuel and adrenaline. On the tarmac, floodlights glared. I expected police, security, someone to help. Instead, 3 men in dark suits stood waiting, their posture too rigid, their eyes too sharp. My stomach dropped. Daniel cursed under his breath. "They found us." The suits advanced. One raised a hand. "Daniel Cole. Hand it over. No one else has to get hurt." Daniel angled himself between me and them. His voice was steady, deadly. "You'll have to kill me first." For a heartbeat, time froze. Noah whimpered against my chest. The notebook pressed like fire into my ribs. And then clarity. This wasn't just Daniel's fight anymore. It was ours. I stepped forward, clutching the notebook. "Is this what you want?" Shouted. "Come and take it." The men tensed. Their eyes flicked from me to Daniel, calculating. In that split second, Daniel lunged, shoving me and Noah toward a service vehicle idling nearby. "Run, Emma. Go!" I stumbled, clutching Noah, as Daniel collided with the nearest suit, chaos erupting behind me. A struggle. The thud of fists and the crack of bone. I didn't look back, I couldn't. I shoved Noah into the passenger seat of the vehicle and scrambled in after him. The driver, wide-eyed and terrified, slammed the accelerator. As we sped across the tarmac, I twisted for one last glance. Daniel stood, bloodied but unbroken, the 3 suits sprawled around him. He looked straight at me, his lips forming words I couldn't hear but knew by heart. Keep him safe. Then the night swallowed him. I held Noah close, tears blurring the runway lights as the plane loomed smaller behind us. The notebook sat heavy in my lap, its secrets darker than I could bear. My husband was alive, but so were his enemies. And now his war had become mine. This wasn't the end. It was only the beginning.